Greetings, friends and brethren. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Continuing Church of God. Today I'd like to talk about what is the mark of the beast. Many wonder about the beast, the mark, and what possible mark or marks could be associated with the beast. Could it have anything to do with the day of worship or work? Could there be any kind of a physical image involved? What's the Bible teach? Are there any statements in past and recent history that give us some ideas of what it might be? And does any church plan to persecute those who do not have what might be the mark of the beast? I'm going to go through that and some other things that I suspect perhaps you've never heard before and give you some ideas to consider in terms of what is the mark of the beast. Now, of course, to know the mark of the beast and the marks of the beast, we need to know who the beast is and what the Bible teaches about the beast, as well as what the Bible teaches about the mark. Now, the Bible uses the term beast in several ways, including representation of human governments. And so first I'd like to go a little bit into the general identification of the beast as far as the Bible is concerned. So if you've got your Bibles, please follow along in the book of Daniel. We're going to go to Daniel chapter 2. And we're going to start in verse 31. I'm going to read through parts of this. I'm not going to just read all of it, but this will give an idea. Basically what happened was the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. In a dream he saw some kind of an image. But he didn't tell anybody what he dreamed, and he wanted to find out what it meant. He was afraid if he told people what he dreamed, people would come up with various interpretations. So he had this dream, called for his wise men to figure it out. None could figure it out. Daniel gets involved, the prophet Daniel. He says that God will let him know what happened, and he'll give the interpretation. So, starting in verse 31 of Daniel chapter 2, we read, this is Daniel speaking, "You, O king, were watching, behold, a great image. This image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. Its head was of fine gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, its feet partly iron, partly of clay. And you watched while a stone was cut without hands. It struck the image, its feet in iron and clay, and broke it into pieces." And going down to verse 36, so this is a dream, this is interpretation. This is verse 37. "You king, you're a king of kings. God in heaven has given you his kingdom and all these kinds of things. You're the head of gold." Verse 39, "After you there's going to be another kingdom which is inferior to yours. And then another of bronze, which will rule the earth. Then a fourth kingdom is going to be strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks and shatters everything. Like iron that crushes a kingdom will break into pieces and crush all others." Now getting to the beast that we're getting closer to, verse 41. "Whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron. The kingdom's going to be divided. Yet the strength of iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with clay." Verse 42, "Because the toes were partly of iron and partly of clay, the kingdom is going to be partly strong and partly fragile." And that's what we're seeing happening now over in Europe. Over in Europe? Yes. Over in Europe, a kingdom is starting to rise up. You could call it a regional confederation right now, but basically most of the nations in continental Europe are in or are requested to join something called the European Union. It doesn't mix really well. And notice verse 43, "And you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay. They will mingle the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay." So the Bible prophesied this wasn't going to be kind of your typical kingdom this way. Down in verse 44 it says, "In those days of these kings, the God of heaven is going to set up a kingdom which shall not be destroyed. It's not going to be left to others. It'll break into pieces and consume all these kingdoms. It'll stand forever. When you saw a stone that was cut out of the mountain without hands, that broke the pieces of iron, bronze, clay, silver, and gold. The great God has made known what's going to happen. The dream is certain, and so is its interpretation." Now this dream had to do with a succession of governments in the Middle East, North Africa, and Europe. Now even though that particular dream didn't call that particular image a beast, other related prophecies do. So you can know that it was talking about the same thing. For example, in Daniel 7, why don't you go over to Daniel 7. Verse 2, Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Now I wanted to talk about the great sea for just a moment. According to Joshua 9:1, Joshua 23:4, Ezekiel 47:13 through 16, the great sea is the Mediterranean Sea. Now, by the way, if I go through these scriptures a little too quickly, there is an article at the www.cogwriter.com website called The Mark of the Beast that has the scriptures and some of the details in case you can't get them in your notes. Plus, it has some other information that I won't be covering in today's sermon. On the other hand, I'll probably say some things in the sermon that will not be in there. At least that's my plan. Okay, so we see this. He sees something about the great sea, and what comes out of the great sea. Four great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. First was like a lion, had eagle's wings. Verse 5, the second was like a bear. Verse 6, another was like a leopard. Verse 7, then I saw the night visions, behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling its residue with feet. It was different from all the beasts before it, and it had 10 horns. So we see some similarities between this and Daniel chapter 2. 4 beasts are mentioned, and 4 kingdoms were mentioned over there. Now, as far as the fourth one, let's go down to verse 23 of Daniel 7. Daniel 7, starting verse 23. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms. And again, we saw that particular comment in Daniel 2. And shall devour the whole earth, trample it, and break it to pieces. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will rise from this kingdom. So the original kingdom, this fourth one, was the Roman kingdom. But you see 10 kings who are going to rise from this kingdom. And another's going to rise after them. He's going to be different than the first. He's going to subdue them. He'll speak pompous words against the Most High. Now notice what else he's going to do. He's going to persecute the saints of the Most High and shall intend to change times and law. Then the saints shall be given to his hand for a time, and half a times. So 3.5 years, encompassing the Great Tribulation and the day of the Lord. Verse 26, but the court shall be seated, and it shall take away his dominion, to consume and destroy it forever. Then the kingdom and dominion, the greatness of the kingdom, and the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. Well, that's consistent with what we saw in Daniel 2. At the end of Daniel 2, stone came and destroyed the kingdoms, became God's kingdom. Same basic thing happens here. Now I'd like to go into Daniel 8. Now, you say, well, what's any of this got to do with the mark of the beast? I'm trying to identify the beast because by identifying the beast, it makes it easier to understand the mark or the marks of the beast. So let's go to Daniel 8, now starting verse 23. It says, in the latter time of their kingdom, so something's going to happen toward the end days. When the transgressors have reached their fullness, we're seeing interesting proliferation of certain types of sins now. So when they get their fullness, a king shall arise having fierce features who understands sinister schemes. Perhaps sinister would be biblical prophecy, but not biblical prophecies. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He'll destroy fearfully. He shall prosper and thrive. He shall destroy the mighty and also the holy people. Now we read in Daniel 7:25 that the saints are given to his hand for a time, times, and half a times. Those are the saints who are not being protected during this time. The Christians who do not flee to a place in the wilderness is discussed in Revelation 12 verses 14 through 16. These are the ones who are the rest of the offspring of the woman, which is those discussed in Revelation 12:17, who will be persecuted at that time. Anyway, verse 25, through his cunning, he's going to cause deceit to prosper under his rule. So something deceitful is going to be going on. He's going to exalt himself in his heart. He's going to destroy many in their prosperity. This would include the United States, Anglo-Saxon descended nations such as Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the United Kingdom. He shall even rise against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without human means. Now this same leader, this same beast, is also called the king of the north in Daniel chapter 11, verses 21 through 44. But let me read a few verses from Daniel 11, starting in verse 36, just to give us some ideas about this king. It says, "Then the king shall do according to his own will. He's going to exalt and magnify himself above every god. He's going to speak blasphemies against the God of gods, and will prosper till the wrath has been accomplished. For what has been determined shall be done. He shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he's going to exalt himself above them all. But in their place, he's going to honor a god of fortresses and a god which his fathers did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and pleasant things." So a god that God didn't know, gold, silver, precious things he's honoring them with. So it sounds like idolatry. Verse 39, he's going to act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign god. Well, the strongest fortresses right now belong to the United States, and to a lesser degree its Anglo-Saxon allies, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory. He shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain. Now notice that he honors the God of fortresses as well as a God his fathers did not know. So this is a changed religion of some type. And it's one that's going to get the world's attention, as it says in Revelation 13:4 and 13:8. Now interestingly, Catholic prophecy warns or tells of time a person is going to change their faith. This is from a Catholic Saint Francis of Paula in the 15th century. He says, this is one that Catholic literature tends to refer to as the great monarch, who seems to be the same person as the king of the north, the beast of the sea. "He shall be the founder of a new religious order different from all others. He'll divide it into 3 strata. This will be the last religious order in the church. It's going to do more good for our holy religion than any other institution. These devout men will wear on their breast the cross. He's going to destroy all tyrants and heresies. There'll be one fold, one shepherd, and he'll reign until the end of the time. In the whole earth there'll be 12 kings, 1 emperor, and 1 pope." That is a particular prophecy. There's a Catholic writer by the name of D.A. Birch who says that many prophecies speak with the fact that the great king, or the great monarch, or the king of the north, at first will not be well liked, especially by the French clergy. Well, why mention any of this here? Well, we remember in Daniel chapter 11, we were reading about this leader. He's going to honor God of fortresses, which I'll get to in a few moments, but also a God that his father did not know. In other words, somehow he's going to change a religion. Catholic prophecy tells of a time when a leader is going to rise up, set up a new religious order, claim Catholicism. It's going to be so different than parts of the Catholic clergy are going to be offended by this. Yet people are going to go along with this. How successful will it be? Well, let's go to the New Testament. This time, Revelation chapter 13. Revelation 13, starting verse 1. "Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw the beast rising up out of the sea." Again, this is the beast of the sea. We read about the beast of the sea back in Daniel. He has 7 heads and 10 horns. And this is a composite beast. You see, it was like a leopard, feet like a bear, mouth like a lion. Dragon gave him power, throne, and great authority. I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. Everybody thought the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, were gone, but actually what they're trying to do in Europe is to implement a Roman Empire, another one. All the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshipped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, who is able to make war with him?" He was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Remember, we read about the time, and half a times in Daniel 7:25. It's the same period of time. He opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacles, and those who dwell in heaven. It was granted with him to make war with the saints and overcome them. Overcome them, again, consistent with Daniel 7:25. And authority was given to him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have been not written in the book of the life of the Lamb. If anyone has a ear, let him hear. He who he leads in captivity is going to go captivity. He who he kills with a sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and faith of the saints. This beast comes from the sea. This is clearly a reference to a European power. The Mediterranean Sea, the top portion of it, Europe is around. You say, yes, so what about the bottom portion, which has the Arabic nations? Well, the old Roman Empire actually controlled both sides. And we're not going to go there right now, but in Daniel 11, verses 40 through 43, we see that the king of the north is going to go against the king of the south, and Egypt will not escape. It says Egypt and Libya, and some other places. Again, North Africa. So this power will end up taking over at least part of the lower portion of the Mediterranean. I'm using my hand because the Mediterranean sort of looks like this. This would be the European coast, and this will be the Middle East and North Africa. So that's already prophesied to take place. So we're talking about a power who's going to control the Mediterranean, and the Mediterranean power is a European power. There are other prophecies that tie this in with Europe, and we have videos and articles on this as well. But basically, Daniel 9, 26 and 27, this beast is supposed to come from the people who destroyed the sanctuary. Well, Rome was destroyed Rome was destroyed too, but General Titus under Rome destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD. The sanctuary was destroyed at that time. And it says that the end time leader, which is called a prince who becomes the king, this is also the beast, comes from those people. So he comes from the Roman Empire. Now, what about the mark of the beast? People wonder a lot about the mark. And again, that's the subject of the sermon. Now that we know that the European beast power is going to be the beast of the sea, he's the one, we're going to find out a little bit about what the Bible says about the mark, and then try to kind of put a couple of those things together. Now, the Greek term translated as mark in the New Testament is the word charagma. It's only used once outside of the book of Revelation in the Textus Receptus, and in Acts 17:29, and it's a reference basically to idols. Let me just read Acts 17:29 so you can see what it says here. Acts chapter 17, verse 29. Therefore, since we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone or something shaped by art in man's devising. And so this particular mark is, that word for mark is used in here in a reference to idols. Now, the Bible discusses the mark of the beast in 8 verses in Revelation, and I'd like to go through all of those. So first, if you're in Revelation, or if you're not, you probably were in Acts, because that's where I just was. If you go to Revelation chapter 13, I'm going to start reading a little bit in verse 11. And there's another beast that comes out of the earth. Revelation 13, verse 8. He had 2 horns like a lamb, but he spoke like a dragon. This is a religious leader. He tries to look like a lamb. Jesus Christ is portrayed as a lamb throughout the book of Revelation and other parts of the Bible. Now notice verse 12. He exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence. Well, the first beast is the beast of the sea, this European leader. Verse 13, he performs great signs. Verse 14, and he deceives those who dwell on the earth by the signs he was granted to do in the sight of the beast. So I mention this because deception is going to be part of why people are going to accept the mark. It's not going to be the only part, but we see deception. People are going to be deceived when they see certain signs and wonders. They're going to say, well, this is really happening, therefore this is from God. No, the Bible warns these things are going to happen, and it doesn't mean it's from God. And we'll continue here. It says he's going to tell those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. Verse 15, he was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image should both speak and cause as many who would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And remember, we know that the beast is going to get people killed. Verse 16, he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, so that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of a beast versus the number of a man. His number is 666. Now, in addition to the image of the beast, in Revelation, we see here that terms such as the name of the beast, the number of the beast, and the mark of the beast. Now, in order to buy and sell, apparently you only have to have one of these three things, not necessarily all three of them. While Sunday is a sign of the Greco-Roman system, it doesn't follow that one would be able to buy and sell simply by claiming that they went to church on Sunday. Plus, also, retired people and people with some savings could probably get by during the Great Tribulation Day of the Lord without working, at least for part of it. So I want people to consider that the mark of the beast may have something to do with more than just Sabbath breaking or Sunday keeping. Now, as far as the number goes, Revelation teaches the number is 666. Now, the first writing that has been found that gives an idea of what this may mean was written by Irenaeus. Irenaeus claimed to know Polycarp, and even though he apostatized in various ways, it may be that he got this part from Polycarp of Smyrna, who was a Church of God leader. Anyway, in his book Adverse Heresies, or Against Heresies, book 5, chapter 30, verse 3, he wrote, "Then also Latinos has the number 666, and it's a very probable solution for this being the name of the last kingdom of the foreseen by Daniel." Now, I have in the article on the mark of the beast how you get 666 from there, 666. L, the lambda, is 30. 1 alpha is 1. The tau is 300. Epsilon is 5. Iota is 10. The nu is 50. The omicron is 70. And the sigma is 200. Adds all up. You get that. So Latinos means Latin kingdom, according to Halley's Bible Handbook, or Latin man. Now, the beast is going to be over a kingdom that would include the old Latin Roman Empire. This would include, as I said before, much of Europe and parts of North Africa and the Middle East. The number of the name signifies a political power that's going to have similarities to the old Roman Empire. 666 basically signifies a Roman system. And how's it a Roman system? Well, the Romans were syncretic in that they melded religions together. The Romans really didn't care a whole lot of what you believed, as long as you would worship their gods too. You could worship yours, but as long as you would sacrifice the emperor, they were fine with that. And they would make modifications, because all that was acceptable as far as they were concerned. And 666 is tied to that system. Now, I'd like to read the next part of Revelation that talks about the beast, mark of the beast, that is. That's Revelation chapter 14. So you can turn a couple of pages, or maybe just a page. Maybe it's on the same page on the other side. To Revelation 14, I'm going to read in verse 9. Then a third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and his image, and receives his mark on his forehead or on his hand, he himself shall also drink of the wine of wrath of God, which is poured out full strength in the cup of his indignation. He shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels, in the presence of the Lamb." Now notice, we're not supposed to, as Christians, say, okay, well, we don't have a choice. We're going to get killed if we don't you have this mark of the beast. And if it does have to do with physically putting something on your hand or your forehead, you're being warned here, don't do it. Christians are being warned here, don't do it. Part of the purpose of this particular sermon is so Christians who watch this will realize they're not supposed to do that. You say, well, we already know that. What people know and how deeply they know it when the time comes, it's not always the same thing. And so I kind of want to emphasize that. Well, anyway, verse 11, "And the smoke of their torment ascends forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night, who worship the beast and his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and have the faith of Jesus. We see here contrasted two groups. Those who are going to accept the mark and those who don't. God is opposed to those who accept the mark and said they're going to get tormented. And who are those who don't? Those who have the testimony of Jesus Christ and keep the commandments of God. The mark of the beast involves breaking God's commandments. That's right here. You can see it contrasted. Now it also says, this passage also suggests that the trial that's going to come upon the saints that are not protected in a place in the wilderness is going to be severe. And extreme patience, perhaps, is how I would word that. Now, if you go over to Revelation 15, I'll read a couple of verses there. We see that God's going to have victory over the mark and the image of the beast. Revelation 15, verse 1. Then I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels having the 7 last plagues, for in them the wrath of God is complete. And I saw something like a sea of glass mingled with fire, and those who have the victory over the beast, over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, standing on the sea of glass, having the harps of God. Let's go to Revelation 16, where we see something somewhat similar. It says, we heard the loud, verse 1, Revelation 16, verse 1. Heard the loud voice from the temple saying to 7 angels, go pour out the bowls of wrath of God on the earth. So this time, we're going to see those who had the mark are not going to do well. Verse 2. So the first went and poured out his bowl on the earth, and a foul and loathsome sore came upon the men who had the mark of the beast and who worshipped his image. So a particular type of punishment is coming. The victory is over those with the mark of the beast and the number of his name. And I say that because some think just if somebody accidentally uses a number, this is what God is going to do. Some have suggested, for example, barcodes. If you use barcodes, you're participating with the beast, because from a computer software double check perspective, they have like what's called a parity code, that the numbers in barcodes add up to 666 when they're added a certain way. But that's not what God is talking about here. He's not talking about just typically using barcodes. Yeah, there's a barcode on a bottle of water here. There's barcodes on just about everything. That's not what God is talking about here. God is talking about those who take the mark of the beast, and worship the beast, and break God's commandments. So, let's say somebody is in Europe, and they have their national identification card. It might have some kind of thing to do with the beast. Just having an ID card of itself, I don't believe, is the mark of the beast. But we're going to get some cards later. Now, I mentioned before in Revelation 13 that the beasts of the earth will deceive those who are on the earth. And those who have the mark of the beast are going to be deceived. Why don't you go now with your Bibles, turn to Revelation chapter 19. We'll read something about that, starting in verse 19. And I saw the beast, and the kings of the earth, and their armies gathered to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his army. Then the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet who worked signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast and those who had worshipped his image. And 2 were cast alive in the lake burning with fire and brimstone. So we see here that the people who are going to get the mark are deceived. You don't need to be deceived. You don't want to do this mark. Now, this deception is taught about in other prophecies. You don't have to go there, but in Matthew 24, verses 24 through 25, Jesus warned that false Christs and false prophets are going to rise up. They're going to show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. Jesus said, and I warned you beforehand. And that's what I'm trying to do now. But let's go to 2 Thessalonians 2. There's a reason that some people are going to be deceived. 2 Thessalonians 2, starting in verse 8, talks about some things here. It says, the lawless one's going to be revealed, whom the Lord will consume with the breath of his mouth to destroy with the brightness of his coming. In the coming of the lawless ones, according to the working of Satan, with all power, signs, and lying wonders. And we have a sermon about that at the Continuing COG channel that you can watch. Or it's a sermonette at the Bible and Prophecy channel. But we have something to identify who this is. Verse 10, with all unrighteous deception among those who perish. Why? Because they did not receive the love of the truth that they might be saved. There are people who watch these videos who compromise. There are people who won't watch these videos, or if they hear anything about us, say, oh, this is just too strange, they don't want to hear it. They don't have the love of the truth that they might be saved. And for this reason, God's going to send them a strong delusion that they should believe the lie, and they will have the mark of the beast. That they all may be condemned who didn't believe the truth but had pleasure in unrighteousness. Now, there's another part of the Bible which praises those who did not get the mark. If you go to Revelation, again, this time we're going to go to Revelation chapter 20. Read something in starting in verse 4, because this ties in with a few other parts of all this. Revelation 20, starting in verse 4. I saw the thrones, and they that sat on them, and judgment was committed to them. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their witness to Jesus and for the word of God, who had not worshipped the beast or his image, and had not received his mark on their foreheads or on their hands. They lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. The rest of the dead didn't live till 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he who takes part of the first resurrection. Over such the second death has no power. They're going to be priests of God and of Christ and shall reign with him 1,000 years. So those who don't get the mark of the beast will reign with Christ for 1,000 years. Interestingly, or oddly, Catholic writings teach that if you teach this, or you believe what this says, this is actually a doctrine of Antichrist. This is from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, number 676. The Antichrist deception already begins to take shape in the world every time the claim is made within history that the Messianic hope, which can only be realized beyond history through eschatological judgment. The Church has rejected, this is a Roman Church, even modified forms of this falsification of the kingdom to come under the names of millenarianism. So the Church of Rome is saying, if you teach any version of millennium, this is a doctrine of Antichrist. Yet, and that's the only doctrine they identify in that particular book. They've had other times they've identified the Sabbath as a doctrine of Antichrist, but this is, they're saying, you're teaching 1,000 years, it's the doctrine of Antichrist. Well, the Bible says those who don't get the mark of the beast will reign for 1,000 years. So we see a contrast between something that's going on in Rome and something that's going on in the Church of God, because in the continuing Church of God, we teach the 1,000-year millennial reign of Jesus Christ. Now, there was an interesting development in the 3rd century about something that you could be called perhaps the certificate of the beast. This is during the time of the Roman Emperor Decius. There was some kind of identification required. He was concerned that there were Christians or semi-Christians in his empire who wouldn't worship him or his emperor, his gods. So let me read something here. It says, in order to root out Christians in his empire, Emperor Decius, 249 to 251 AD, issued an edict requiring all citizens of the empire to sacrifice to him in the presence of a Roman official to obtain a certificate of sacrifice called a libellus. This posed a moral problem for Christians. They could sacrifice and live, they could refuse to sacrifice and die. Now, some paid bribes to get this piece of paper. I've seen 2 versions of the libellus, and what I've read is basically they say that I've sacrificed to idols, I've always sacrificed to idols, and then I've eaten the meat sacrificed to idols. That's basically what it said. And so that probably includes biblically unclean meats. That's kind of interesting. Now, it's possible that there will be some type of document issued by the final beast power that maybe banks will require to open bank accounts. One of the things about the mark of the beast is it can control buying and selling with increased amounts of digital currencies, plus digital transactions through credit cards, PayPal, Bitcoins, Apple Pay, Google Wallet. The nation of Ecuador is going to have its own digital currency. It may be that an easier way, this would be an easy way to control buying and selling, because you probably have to have a bank, some kind of a bank account or some kind of an account. Although in Ecuador they're trying to get around that. But even then, they'll have a digital currency that can be monitored. And this, it may be that banks will require that you bring in some kind of certificate that says that you sacrificed to idols or to the beast, or you worship the beast, or you got the mark or something. Perhaps I should mention that even though the Bible in Leviticus 19:28 is opposed to tattoos, the Church of Rome is not against tattoos, and it will be that we'll see people tattooing marks on their forehead or on their hands. The old ancient Patagonians used to put crosses on their foreheads and forearms as far as tattoos. I'm going to be brief on some of the history side, but people may be surprised to realize that crosses were not something that early Christians did. The first reference to them seems to be about 150 years after Jesus, maybe 200 years, between 150 and 200 years after Jesus was resurrected. Tertullian wrote that they made some kind of a sign on their forehead, and others had said that as well. But since it didn't come from the Bible, where could it have come from? Well, during this time in the Roman Empire, there was great worship of the sun god Mithras. And let me read a few things about people who entered the Mithra religion or were in the Mithra religion. It says candidates who successfully passed the Mithratic initiations were called lions, and they were marked upon their foreheads with the Egyptian cross. Here's something else. Mithras signed his soldiers on the forehead with a cross. This is from a Catholic writer here. It says there was two people for a couch. This is got to do with Mithra. A tripod, 4 loaves of bread. Each of the loaves of bread was marked with a cross. These love feasts are evidently ritual commemoration of the banquet which Mithra supposedly celebrated before he went into heaven. And this other source, this is from Nabar's The Mysteries of Mithra, the pagan belief that shaped the Christian world. Mithratic initiates would therefore have the sun cross on their foreheads. The similarity of the cross of ashes made on the forehead on the Christian Ash Wednesday is striking. Some have suggested this to be an example of early Christians borrowing from the Mithratic cult. Others suggest both cults were drawing from the same prototype. But why would we see people do those type of things? Well, one, there were different views of Christianity. Some incorporated paganism. But you said, well, what about the main bodies of people who call themselves Christian? Well, I'd like to read something from a Catholic writer. This is from C.M. Magnum. It says, in 312, Emperor Constantine was in Trier, Germany, where he had an unexpected vision of a cross that appeared in the sky with the haunting words, "In this sign you will conquer." The emperor was buoyed by the apparition and encouraged his 20,000 troops in an upcoming battle against Emperor Maxentius' 100,000 men. Constantine's soldiers, the majority of who were pagan, placed the sacred image of the cross on their shields. Now, what was actually seen was Constantine. This is from Eusebius' Life of Constantine. Said he described the figure of the sign he saw. It had gold and precious stones. A long spear overlaid with gold formed the figure of the cross by the means of a traverse bar laid over it. It had on the whole a wreath of gold and precious stones. And it had the letters P and X in its center. The emperor constantly made use of this sign of salvation as a safeguard against adverse and hostile powers. In other words, as a good luck charm. And commanded others that they should be carried at the head of all his armies. And we read something from Philip Van S. Meyer's Ancient History. It says, the Battle of Milvian Bridge, 312. Constantine, the cross, he led to adopt this emblem because as he once prayed to the sun god, a cross over the setting sun and the inscription posted on it. In this sign, conquer. Obedient to this vision, he had it done. Now here's a part that I want to emphasize here. Whatever may have been the circumstances or the motive which led Constantine to make the cross his standard, this act constitutes a turning point in the history of the so-called Christian church, I added so-called, Christianity became the world's religion of peace and goodwill, but after the victory for the cross at the Milvian Bridge, a change passed over the church. It leaned more and more upon an earthly power and became militant. This infusion in the church of the military spirit of Rome was one of the most important consequences of the story of the miraculous cross in the sky and the espousal of the so-called Christian cause by Emperor Constantine. So, while Jesus indicated his people would not be involved in carnal warfare in this age in John 18:36, and early Christians, including most apostates, wouldn't fight, this changed the time of Constantine. Now remember that in Daniel chapter 11, in verse 38, it says the beast power is going to honor a god of fortresses. Well, that's what Constantine did. He got people who profess Christ to honor the war god. And those who claim to be Christian and are warring are following that to this day. Now, Constantine himself is the one who enacted the first Sunday law. He issued an edict against those who wouldn't follow his compromised religion. He greatly exalted the political power of the Greco-Roman bishops. He massively increased idolatry and military service amongst those who professed Christ. He even summoned a council in Nicaea to go against the practices of the Apostle John and others in terms of keeping Passover. He also took away certain Church of God properties and ordered the death penalty for Church of God Christians in the Jerusalem area who would not eat biblically unclean meats. The Greco-Romans call him Constantine the Great for what he did, but because of him a lot of things happened. There was compromise and crosses all over. The religion Mithra uses crosses, Constantine-like crosses. While the Greco-Roman churches were not typically venerating physical crosses before the time of Constantine, that all changed. Then his mother, Helena, she claimed on September 14th, 326, that she discovered the cross. Now I should comment here, we have a Bible Prophecy video on this, and we also have an article on the origin of the cross at the cogwriter.com website. There is no biblical evidence that Jesus was killed on what we commonly consider to be a cross right now. But even if he was, having physical crosses was not part of the faith once for all delivered to the saints. And that's what we're supposed to contend for, as the Apostle Jude wrote in Jude verse 4. Now, some associated with the Church of God throughout history have had concerns about crosses. The Catholic Encyclopedia notes, for example, that Paulicians held that all external religious forms, sacraments, rites, especially material pictures and relics, should be abolished. To honor the cross was especially reprehensible. Some Catholics, too, shared their dislike for pictures and relics. And that's true up until around the 8th century. Even the Church of Rome was not that into relics. They were to a degree, but they really started to adopt it big time in Constantine the 4th century, and then over time they got more and more of this. Now, I'd like to read something from the history of Armenia. And this is from 1054 to 1058. It's a letter written by Gregory Magistros. And he's complaining about a group. It says, "They represent our worship of God as worship of idol, as if we, who honor the sign of the cross and holy pictures, were still engaged in worshiping devils." In Italy and elsewhere, there were others who objected against crosses. About the year 1054, this is from Jones' History of the Christian Church, the Patarines had become numerous in Milan. They flourished there for at least 200 years. They rejected not only Jerome of Syria, Augustine of Africa, Gregory of Rome, Ambrose of Milan, considering them and other pretended fathers as corrupters of Christianity. They called the adoration of the cross the mark of the beast. They had no share in the state. They took no oaths and bare no arms. Again, I don't know if these were Church of God Christians, but it certainly sounds like it. We don't swear because the Bible says not to do it. We don't take up military arms. We don't consider people like Augustine faithful. We consider they were corrupted. And we certainly don't honor the cross. Then Philip Schapp, in his History of the Christian Church, said the Cathari also renounced priestly vestments, as we do, altars and crosses as idolatrous. They called the cross the mark of the beast and declared it was no more value than a ribbon. Read something about the Paulicians from the Catholic Encyclopedia. It says they honored not the cross. They rejected all the idols. They rejected the so-called sacraments, and they had a special version of monks. So since Gibbons, Paulicians have been described as the survival of early and pure Christianity. Godly folk who clung to the gospel, rejecting later superstitions. The Cathari also renounced priestly vestments, altars, crosses, idolatrous. They called the cross the mark of the beast. That's from the Catholic Encyclopedia. In the 14th century, there was an inquisitor. Here's what some that he was torturing said. He says, they assert that the cross of Christ should not be adored or venerated because, as they urge, no one would venerate or adore the gallows of which a father, relative, or friend had been hung. They urge further that they who adore the cross ought for similar reasons to worship all thorns and lances, because Christ's body had thorn and crowns on there, and he got lance in his side. Where did crosses come from? According to Seymour's The Cross in Tradition, History, and Art, the cross seems to originate in ancient Egypt and was adopted by other cultures like Babylon. Alexander Hislop in his 2 Babylon book says, same cross the Romans now worship was used in the Babylon mysteries. What's called the Christian cross was originally no Christian emblem, but the mystic Ptah of the Chaldeans and the Egyptians. The ancient Assyrians, it says the treasures of art and religion in Syria have both been open to us. The cross is everywhere dominant. So the Assyrians used it. We know the Crusaders used it, of course. That's why Crusaders means cross bearers. And it should also be pointed out that Catholics point to faithfulness to the cross as something that's important. Now, I found in the Geneva commentary on Revelation 13:16, that's a Protestant source, that they believe that the Roman Catholic practice of confirmation is the mark of the beast. It says to receive the mark in the right hand or the forehead. That's the consecrated oil, which is the ordinance they make, signing them in their foreheads and hands. They make the sign left by Christ, and the ordinance of baptism useless. And then it says it's the mark of the name of the beast. Now what's interesting is what this Protestant source didn't tell you is that the way that Catholics confirm is by putting the mark of the cross on people. It's what they do when they confirm with oil. Now, Church of God writers such as Herbert Armstrong said that the martyrs over 1,000 years ago were killed because they wouldn't worship the church, conform to his idolatry, pagan beliefs, or customs, or worship the so-called Holy Roman Empire because they refused to receive the mark of the beast. And that is the case. As far as Christianity and some early persecutions, I'd like to read something that will help us understand more about the mark of the beast of the end time. This is from Graham Snooks. Christianity was more exclusive, secret, and potentially more subversive than all the others. The followers of Christ rejected the old gods completely. They refused to sacrifice the emperor and his gods. And they established an empire-wide network of secret cells practicing strange rites. Not surprisingly, the cult attracted suspicion and hostility from Roman state, particularly when its members refused to worship publicly the emperor and his gods. Christians attracted, therefore, sporadic imperial persecution in the 2nd century, which became more systematic and determined in the 3rd and 4th century. And as I mentioned before, in the 3rd century, Emperor Decius said you need to have a certificate, a libellus, which means like a little book that says that you have worshipped or sacrificed to him. And as Graham Snooks said, the Christians wouldn't participate in military warfare, they wouldn't do empire worship, they were considered a secret cult, and this is something that they didn't like. Well, the mark of the beast is make sure you're part of their system, part of this Babylonian system. Anyway, continuing with what Herbert Armstrong wrote in his The Mark of the Beast booklet, those who receive the plagues are breakers of God's commandments, and also at the same time receivers of the mark. It's become more and more plain that the mark of the beast represents commandment breaking, idolatry. Some worship idols carved out of stone, wood, or marble. The Sabbath is made for man. He is the Lord of the Sabbath. It was made to keep the true identity of the true God and to keep him from idolatry. Here's the patience of the saints. This is from a sermon now, transcript called The Mark of the Beast. These are those who they don't have the mark, they keep the commandments of God and have faith in Christ. On the one hand, there are those who have the name of God on their forehead when it comes to work out things, and they have the commandments of God. And one of those commandments tells you something you can't use your hands and work, and that's the Sabbath day. It's got to do with God's commandments. Now, they're going to compel disobedience to God, Armstrong wrote. They're not going to compel you to commit adultery. They might to worship idols, and they might not. But he says they'll compel you to observe Sunday instead of Saturday. Well, in terms of idols, crosses are often venerated in an idolatrous manner. And they're considered so associated with Christianity by the mainstream that few would consider the cross or crucifix or something like that could be a mark or the mark of the beast. Now, Catholic priests use their right hand to put the mark or the sign of the cross on the foreheads of those who they baptize, those who participate in Ash Wednesday services. And as a young Catholic, I remember getting a cross on my head on Ash Wednesday, and also when you're confirmed Catholic. Catholics also sometimes sign themselves with the cross, with holy water, as they call it, when they enter church. If the mark of the beast has to do with a cross, this will be something that Catholics have long accepted, so it won't be an issue. There's a story I've told before, I'd like to say again. One of the reasons I'm concerned the possibility that the cross will be a or the mark of the beast. When I was a child, I watched a rerun of a program called William Tell. And in this, William Tell was always fighting against the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which is part of one of the so-called Holy Roman Empires. Anyway, the governor, the mayor, the Burgermeister was his actual title, of the area wanted everybody to worship before or bow down before the banner of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And people didn't want to do that. So he gathered the people together in a plaza or square and said, look, if you don't bow down before this, we're going to kill you. And so at first nothing happens. Then about 15 seconds later, everybody drops down to their knees. And the Burgermeister smiles from ear to ear. Aha! They will now recognize my authority, the authority of our empire over him. But then for some reason he looked behind him and he saw a Catholic priest standing up with a crucifix behind him. William Tell had gone to a Catholic priest and told him to do that, asked him to do that. So why do I say that? Because while people might have hesitation to bow down before certain things, Catholics have no hesitation to bow down before crosses, and even many Protestants don't have any problem with that. The Catholics basically believe that the Bible wants you to get marked with the cross. They actually quote Ezekiel 9, where an angel puts a sign on people's foreheads. It's called a taw or a thaw, and they claim it's a cross. I don't know how well that's going to come here, but you can see it below my finger here. They say the Bible says you should have that done. And it says the cross was originally traced by Christians with the thumb or forefinger on their hand, or the finger of their hand. It was clearly associated with the idea with references to certain scriptures, such as Ezekiel 9:4, the mark of the letter Taw, and especially Apocalypse 7:3, 9:4, 14:1. So Catholics have pushed the idea that this is something good for Christians. Let me read something else about this. This is how Catholics explain certain things related to the beast. It says the purpose of delaying the four winds, and this is from what's called the Book of Destiny. It's a Catholic book written by Kramer. So the scene calls to mind Ezekiel 9:4, to mark a thaw on the foreheads of the faithful. And the thaw in ancient Hebrew had the form of a cross. In chapter 13, verse 16, the followers of the beast have... Oh, hold on. The followers of the beast are signed on their forehead in the right hand. They have the seal of the beast in contrast with those who have the seal of the Spirit on their foreheads and on their hearts. Maybe that wasn't really clear. What Catholics are saying is the mark of the beast is to have something other than a cross on your forehead. I'd like to read something from Catholic Mass. Somebody's defending Catholic Mass. He says, tracing a little cross over our foreheads is actually the original form of the sign of the cross. When tracing, the bishop places the oil in the form of the cross on your forehead at confirmation. The present sign of the cross was developed around the time of Nicaea itself, as to deny the error of Arianism and express the belief in the Trinity as the Council of Nicaea defined it. Now, I interjected that here. That's simply not the case. The Council of Nicaea did not end up defining the Trinity. But people did start to accept crosses, not because of a Trinitarian connection so much as it was the acceptance of crosses by Emperor Constantine and those who would follow him. Now, the old Radio Church of God published an article teaching that many are going to misidentify Jesus as a final Antichrist based on writings of their so-called church fathers and Catholic prophecies. He talks about something that he claims Hippolytus wrote. Hippolytus was a bishop in Rome in the 3rd century. He said, "At the whole earth will bewail the life of anguish, in the sea, in the manner of bewail it in the sun too." This is probably during the day of the Lord. Will wail on the account of the race, because all have turned aside from the holy God and obeyed the deceiver and received the mark of the abominable one, the enemy of God, instead of the quickening cross of the Savior. So this writing attributed to Hippolytus is saying you're supposed to have the sign of the cross or the mark of the cross. And something else David John Hill reported, he said, this is in the old Good News, the Radio Church of God, by reason of scarcity of food, all will go and worship him, and he'll put his mark on the right hand and their forehead, so no one might put the sign of the honorable cross on his forehead or his right hand, but his hand is bound. So basically what Hippolytus is claimed to be Hippolytus' writing here is saying is that you'll be prohibited to wear crosses if you're Antichrist. Well, the reality is that the Antichrist power will encourage it, not decrease it, and not go against it. But Jesus would not want people to be wearing crosses. The Catholics tie the cross in with both hands in the forehead. I'll read something from the Catholic Encyclopedia on the sign of the cross. It says, at the beginning of Mass is Catholic Church service, the celebrant makes the sign of the cross by placing his left hand under his breast and raising his right to his forehead. All the above methods of venerating this life-giving symbol, adopting as an emblem the marking of a little cross, seems to be the most ancient. So we see the right hand and foreheads involved. Catholic priestly vestments and ones that bishops wear have crosses on them. The consecration of their altars, crosses are to be marked on them as well. And I'd like to read something from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, number 1674. It says, besides sacramental liturgy and sacramentals, people need to take into account forms of piety that people follow. The religious sense of the Christian, I mean Catholic people, has always found expressions such as veneration of relics, visits to sanctuaries, pilgrimages, processions, the Stations of the Cross, religious dances, the rosary, medals, etc. Catholics expect that so-called Christian people will have rosaries, crosses, and medallions as part of their identification, and those who aren't faithful will not. Now, Catholic scholars made various claims about crosses. I'd like to read some comments from the original Reims New Testament. This is from Catholic scholars. This has to do with Revelation 13, verse 14. The image of the beast. They that now refuse to worship Christ's image would worship Antichrist. And we may note here that as the making honor of the image was not against the honor of Antichrist, but wholly for it, also the image erected of Nebuchadnezzar, and the worship was altogether the honor of him. So the worship of Christ's image and the honor of Christ himself is and not against him, as the Protestants madly imagine. So what they're saying here is, Catholics saying, if you won't worship Christ's image, this is mad. You should be willing to do that. Well, let's go further. This is what they say about verse 17. As belike for the perverse imitation of Christ, whose image, specifically the crucifix, he honors and exalts in every church, Antichrist will have his image honored, for he sees all true Christian men bear the badge of the cross in their foreheads. He likewise will force his to have another mark and abolish the sign of Christ. So the Catholic scholar is saying, look, Catholics are going to have the sign of the cross, and someone's going to get rid of them. But the like emulation also, the wicked opposition will have his name and letters thereof to be sacred, to warn in men's caps or written in solemn places and be worshipped. As to the name of God was given to the Jews amongst 4 characters, so it seems the apostle alludes to a number of the Antichrist's name. And here it's to be noted that the Protestants, plucking down the image of Christ out of all churches, and his sign of the cross from men's foreheads. So they're saying the sign of the cross is supposed to be on men's foreheads, and Protestants, and of course the Church of God, are opposed to it. And when Christ's images and ensigns or arms shall be abolished, the idol of Antichrist shall be set up instead, for it's already begun, the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel. Basically, what Catholics tend to believe is that when Jesus returns, they're going to call him Antichrist because he's going to get rid of crosses. And people should be wearing crosses. Here's something that says, there's Old New Testament allusions to the cross and crucifixion. And as far as Ezekiel 9 goes, it says, according to St. Jerome and other followers, as a solemn symbol for the cross of Christ, quote, mark the taw upon the foreheads of men that sigh. So Catholics believe that what they're supposed to do is, during this time, have crosses on their head. I want to make this clear. Catholics believe they should have the crosses. Now, everybody's not going to go around with a cross on their head. More educated intellectuals and others may want to do that. So maybe they'll have an identification card which they can pull out with their right hand, or some other kind of a mark. Catholics tend to believe that the marking in Ezekiel 9:3-4 means that the seal put on that's the seal that was put on Christians in Revelation 7:2-3. They think this is the cross. But they tend to forget what the Bible really says. Now, I alluded to Ezekiel before. I'm not going to go there now, but I'd like to go to Revelation 7 to understand some things. Let's go to Revelation chapter 7, verse 2. I want to read this so you understand if this sounds like somebody who's putting a cross on their own forehead, because this is what Catholic writings suggest or teach. Revelation 7, verse 2. And I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God, and he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and sea, saying, do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees, till we, that's angels, have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. Both in Ezekiel 9:3-4 and Revelation 7:2-3, it's an angel that puts it on the faithful, not Catholic bishops or priests or anything along that. Jesus nor his followers wore crosses. The Bible is clear that God's against the mark of the beast. And Catholics commonly teach, quote, the sign of the cross is the mark of Christians. This is from Signs and Symbolism of Baptism. Now, it's not just Catholics. The 17th century Anglican bishop Ezekiel Hopkins claimed that the cross is our mark. There was also a Catholic prophecy from Countess Francesca di Biliante. It says, in those days the rosary will bring down untold blessings. We'll even know true Christians by his rosary. So as a Catholic prophecy says, we'll know the real Christians from the phony ones, because real Christians will have a rosary which tends to have an image on it, and that will be a way to distinguish it. Another Catholic nun, a prophetess, this one's a nun, and who's been beatified by the Church of Rome, claimed that some are especially hated devotion to the rosary. Catholic prophecy and Catholic writings suggest at the time of the end, those with crosses are going to be ruling over. For example, Francis de Paul, who I quoted him before from 1470 or so, said, "These holy cross bearers will reign and dominate over the whole earth till the end of time." Anna Katrina Emmerich, who I just mentioned to you before, that nun, she saw some beast, and there were youths, and there were citizens and peasants, many of whom were marked on the forehead with a red cross. As the army drew near, the captives and oppressed were delivered and swelled the ranks, while the demolishers and conspirators were put to flight on all sides. What she's saying here is that there's going to be some kind of a time where those who have crosses are going to persecute those who do not have crosses. Here's another Catholic prophet type, Josepha von Borg, who died in 1807. God's going to choose a descendant of Constantine, who after a period of exile is going to rule over Europe. There's somebody I have in mind for that right now. We'll see if it's him or not. He's going to have the sign of the cross on his breast. Under him, the Catholic religion will spread as never before. Here's something from a Catholic Saint Bridget of Sweden, who died in 373. War shall end when an emperor will be elected in a wonderful manner, be victorious through the sign of the cross. He'll destroy the Jewish and Mohammedan sects. Now, while that sounds like you're just destroying Jews and Muslims, which the Bible suggests that will happen, Catholics historically have called those who keep the Sabbath to be Jews and not really Christian. But overall, Catholic writings basically say that those who have crosses will be the good guys, and those who don't are those that are going to kill or persecute. Now, there have been Catholics who've wondered about things like this, but there's also Protestants. There are Protestant writers such as H. Ward in the 19th century. He warned about crosses. He said the Latin Empire, instead of using Roman eagles, now uses the image of the pagan cross. He was concerned that that could be the image of the beast. Somebody who'd be more famous, most of you, probably all of you have heard of Sir Isaac Newton. For his opinion of the mark, quote, "As to the mark of the beast, which I conceive to be the cross, no less than the name Latinus is peculiar to the beast, that is, or the Papal Roman Empire." So Isaac Newton, who was not in the Church of God, believed the mark of the beast was a cross as well. There are some commentaries that also suggest that. Now, there are some who think that the mark of the beast, both Catholic and Protestant sources, it'll be some kind of a different kind of a cross, and that's to be warned about. This one's from a Catholic writer, History of Antichrist. It says, "What this sign shall come, time will reveal." Yet there's some Catholic commentators of the Holy Writ or of the Bible who, according to special revelation, pretend it shall be formed out of the Greek letters X and P interlaced, which resembles the number of Christ. No one can buy or sell without that. Well, that P-row cross was something that Emperor Constantine used, and there's also from Joseph Seitz's commentary also talks about that possibly being the mark of the beast. So from Catholic and Protestant sources, they think maybe a different kind of a cross will be used. I'm not saying that a cross has to be the mark of the beast. I am saying, however, Catholic writings say at the time of the end, those who have crosses are going to persecute those who do not have crosses, that the cross is how God is going to seal his people, and that's how you will know the true people of God from the false. And I don't see that in Scripture. I see those who God seals, he's going to do through angels. There won't be a physical thing outside like that you'll see. Oh yeah, you can see if somebody bows down before idols, and you can see whether or not people keep Sabbath or Sunday. Certainly you can see that. But as far as them actually having something physical placed on them, I don't see it. Again, I don't believe that necessarily if the cross is the mark of the beast, everybody's going to have a tattoo of the cross on their forehead or on their hand. But between identification cards and other forms, we certainly could see this. What about possibly having Mary involved? There are various Catholic prophecies or that people say Mary said something. Like, for example, here's one. Our Lady said, it'll be those who recite the rosary who, during their lives, who get graces and liberty. The devotion of the rosary is a sign of predestination. Here's one from what some kind of Mary said in June 25th, 1946. I'm the mediatrix of grace. Father wants the world to recognize his handmaid. My sign is about to appear as God wills it. I cannot reveal my power to the world yet. Then I'll reveal it myself. Choose a sign for yourselves so the Trinity may be adored for all. Pray and sacrifice through me, this apparition claimed to be Mary said. I will impose crosses on my children, and they will be as heavy and deep as the sea, and I will love them in my sacrificed Son. Be prepared to bear the cross in order that the Trinity may be honored. So the cross and the Trinity are considered to be marks here. As far as the rosary, I'm sorry, I skipped over something on that. The defeat of the Albigensian heretics was allegedly because the Catholics recited the rosary. So we see some Marian things associated with here. There's a prophecy from Venerable Magdalene Porzat. They call her Venerable. Mary comes from heaven. She's going to be powerful and change all men. Holy women, images of Mary, shall have power to work miracles. After them comes Mary to prepare the way for her Son, his triumphant church. So this may have something to do with the image of the beast. I should possibly mention, according to that same mystic, this comes after a time of universal bankruptcy and confusion. Why do I mention that? Because the international financial situation might get worse. Maybe only a little bit more, maybe tremendously more. And Catholics might point to that as proof that this Marian apparition is correct, and that people should be venerating Mary and having these images of Mary and all that kind of stuff. There have been many who've worried that that Mary will be the image of the beast, have something to do with the mark of the beast. This is an article called England that warned about that from 1857. And there are other kinds of writings along those lines. But I would like to read another Catholic prophecy, supposedly from Mary. This is somebody in Czechoslovakia in 1958 said, Mary said, all my children will receive and carry the sign of the cross on their foreheads. But that's simply not something that we see from the Bible. Now, while Protestants, Catholics, and Eastern Orthodox do use crosses, I will comment that at least one Eastern Orthodox writer was concerned that Catholics are going to use Mary to get some kind of evangelical ecumenical thing to occur. He warns about that. Says they're trying to use Mary to tell you can get through heaven through the back door, but he said that's not correct. Then he said, what type of Mary do Muslims and Protestants go toward? It's a distorted view. So this is not true. They shouldn't do this, and that the Muslim concept of the Mahdi and the Messiah is talking about Antichrist, not Christ himself. So there are some warnings that some of this Marian stuff will become more prevalent. The Bible is clear that physical images are associated with end-time Babylon. That's why idolatry is important to pay attention to in terms of possibly being involved with the mark of the beast. If you've got your Bibles, let's go to the book of Isaiah, Isaiah 21. Isaiah 21, starting in verse 9. Actually, I'm not going to read 9 in this particular passage. Babylon is fallen, is fallen. Now, you can read about that Babylon falling in Revelation 18. And all the carved images of her gods he has broken to the ground. God's going to destroy whatever images and marks idolatrous things they have. Catholic prophecy warns someone's going to come and destroy crosses and rosaries and other images. Well, Jesus is going to come and do that. It's one of the reasons why I suspect something to do with the cross or crucifix could have to do with the mark of the beast and the image of the beast. Maybe even the image that talks could be some kind of thing on a crucifix. I don't know that. I'm not saying that as doctrine. But I am saying that the Bible warns about idolatry associated with Babylon. Since you're already in Isaiah, let's go to Isaiah 31. Verse 4. So the Lord of hosts will come down to fight for Mount Zion and for its hill. Okay, so God's going to come. Verse 7. For in that day every man shall throw away his idols of silver and his idols of gold. So when Christ comes, people are going to be getting rid of their idols. So obviously they have idols. Sin, which your own hands have made for yourself. Then Assyria shall fall by the sword, not of man, and a sword not of mankind shall devour him. He shall flee from the sword, and the young men will become forced labor. So we see the Assyrians tied in here. We see idolatry tied in here. Now I was mentioning, in addition to idols and icons, I mentioned Marian apparitions. One of the things that the Church of Rome believes proves they're the true church is that they have had more Marian apparitions than other churches. The Eastern Orthodox have had some themselves, and the two of them are talking about unifying. But I would also like to comment that Catholics believe that they've had statues that bleed, statues that shed tears, especially of Mary, images of various types, banners with crosses. Many Catholics consider that these are signs that their faith is the correct one. So if there's Marian statues that cry or bleed or whatever it is, they consider this to be proof. Now, from a true Christian point of view, we would consider these not as proof. We would say, we're not going to say that they're all faked by a priest or a monk or a person who's just claiming it. But any time like that would happen, we would call those sorceries. Now, sorceries are warned about in Isaiah 47:9 and 47:12, associated with the lady called the Virgin. And we also read that sorceries are warned about in Revelation 9:21 and Revelation 18:23, being associated with the beast power. Now, we know that demons have used signs and false approaches throughout the centuries to try to deceive people, as well as various signs of idolatry. Satan's in the habit of using the same ideas, to deceive mankind. You could look what Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 2:11. Satan certainly realizes the impact that apparently breathing and speaking statue would help deceive the world. Maybe this is one of the reasons why in 1 John 5:21, Apostle John ended one of his epistles with, "Little children, keep yourself from idols." Amen. Now that particular admonition might partially been given so people will realize they should not pay attention to any end-time image, no matter how real it seems. But it's going to be so real that people are going to believe it. I'd like to read Revelation 9. So why don't you go to Revelation chapter 9, starting in verse 20. It says, "But the rest of mankind, who were not killed by these are plagues that God sent, did not repent of the works of their hands, that they should not worship demons and idols of gold, silver, brass, stone, wood, which can neither see, walk, nor hear. And many crosses are made of wood and those other substances. And they did not repent of their murders, or their sorceries, or their sexual immorality, or their thefts." Is the mark of the beast only Sunday worship? Some have wondered about that. So let's go back to Daniel 7:25, because I'll read this and I want to talk about this for a moment. Daniel 7:25 says, He, that's this beast, shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High. He shall intend to change times and laws. Then the saints will be given his time for time and half a times. While that verse clearly ties a change of times in with the final 3.5 years, I should mention here that Sunday has been a sign of the Roman Empire since since Constantine enacted the first Sunday law in 321 AD. That the final beast is going to make some changes. So it wouldn't seem that just Sunday itself is his mark. Now these changes could affect keeping the Sabbath. A lot of things it could do. Now the Bible supports the idea that both the image of the beast and the mark of the beast are likely to be some kind of physical item. Maybe a statue, a cross, rosary, some type of Marian image, or something along those lines. And that's certainly supported by certain Catholic writings, which I believe Satan inspired. The Bible's clear, in the last days, people are going to fall for doctrines of demons. So it says in 1 Timothy 4:1. Now Catholics often believe that Antichrist fulfills Revelation 13:16 by stopping them from having crosses on their foreheads and having priests as the right hand. Catholics tend to teach that one they call the great monarch, which we call the beast, or the king of the north, will have followers who are going to wear crosses and they're going to persecute those that don't. Furthermore, Catholic scholars have long suggested that when Antichrist appears, he's going to stop people from having crosses on their foreheads and at other places. The reason that this is a passing interest is because those once in the old radio Church of God and we in the continuing Church of God consider the one we consider to be the returning Jesus Christ. Certain Catholic prophecies suggested he's the final Antichrist. When Jesus returns, he would be expected to get rid of idols and icons and tattoos and veneration of the cross. And the Catholic understanding of Revelation 13:14 through 17 implies that it might be crosses that were a mark or the sign of their coming ecumenical religion under the beast and the false prophet, the Antichrist, the Antipope. Since so many people accept crosses as a valid religious symbol, it would be logical it could be included as a major symbol of the coming ecumenical religion. Commandment breaking is the mark of the beast, and the mark of the beast is going to involve that. Now, as far as the beast himself goes, he's going to be a European leader. He's going to decide what he wants his specific mark to be through probably satanic influence. Since Satan's inspired many false prophets and apostates throughout the ages to endorse crosses, crucifixes, Mary's statues, some of these things could be involved. What the beast cares most about is control and his agenda. And he's going to use marks of religious significance where he feels it's important to him. Now, I'm not saying that based on Catholic and other private prophecies, including those who may have been in the Church of God, like Cathari, some of the Catharis said the cross is the beast, or the mark of the beast, that the cross must be, or the mark must be a cross or crucifix or something. Sunday worship may be a or even the image of or the mark of the beast. Yet I believe that we need to make clear the possibility that certain physical items could be the image of the beast, the abomination, the mark of the beast, as idolatry normally does include physical items, and the Bible clearly warns against idolatry. And we're seeing a discussion of something to do with idolatry when you read Revelation 13, which is what discusses the mark of the beast. Now we have another sermon that we've done called The Mark of the Antichrist that you also might find helpful. Believe what your Bible says. Do not fall for whatever mark of the beast may be coming, because it's going to involve commandment breaking. And God's people have the testimony of Jesus Christ and keep the commandments of God. And that's what I hope you all will strive to be. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Continuing Church of God.